reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Reason and common sense, what a radical proposition. Anyway, to comment further on exactly that, Chief Economist of the MB Fund and MB Super and co-founder of Macro Business, it's Leith Van Onselen. Morning, Leith. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks, Mike. How about yourself?
Mate, I'm pretty well, but talking to the young folks, which I do occasionally, apart from anything else, having a 21-year-old son, they are deeply concerned about what you describe here as a generational housing shortage. In fact, a lot of them seem to have pretty much given up, and the only way I'm going to get to buy a house is if I win the lottery.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking, especially, I'm obviously talking to a Sydney and Brisbane audience here. It's very shocking for those two capital cities in particular. So, as you just mentioned, Australia is suffering from a generational housing shortage, and this has come about, amid historically high immigration-driven population growth.
Yeah.
So we've had basically, this century so far, not even 25 years, Australia's population's grown by, about 8.7 million people. 46% is huge, and we've obviously had a massive spike after the pandemic.
Yep.
At the same time, our housing supply has been pretty sluggish and can't keep up, and as a result, we've got this gaping housing shortage, and we're basically seeing the impacts in cities like Sydney and Brisbane. So Sydney and Brisbane actually are the two most expensive housing markets in the nation. Now, obviously, Sydney's always been the most expensive housing market, but Brisbane now has overtaken Melbourne. It's now the second most expensive housing market in the nation. So Sydney's median house prices was 1.5 million in June, whereas Brisbane's topped 1 million for the first time in history in June, that's according to a firm called Cotality, which used to be known as CoreLogic.
Right.
And a couple of years back, in late 2023, National Cabinet, which is basically all the state and territory leaders, they meet up with the federal government, they agreed on a national housing accord, and that promised to build 1.2 million homes over 5 years, and that started on 1 July last year. So we're currently, 1 year into that. And this 1.2 million target obviously requires 240,000 homes to be built every single year. Now, I'll say from the outset, that was a level that was always fantastical and was never really realistic, because that 240,000 homes per year that's required for 5 consecutive years is higher than any single year in Australia's history. So the biggest year for Australian housing construction in our history was in 2017, when we built 223,600 homes. Now, that's 7% less than what's expected to be built for 5 years straight. So, it's delusional, especially when we've got, obviously, massive builder insolvencies, huge rising construction costs, structurally high interest rates. We've got the building industry competing for labour against government big build infrastructure projects, all that sort of thing. So it was never realistic. Now, a few months back, the federal government's own advisory body on housing, they're called the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council, they're set up by Labor to analyse the market. They released their State of the Housing Market report a couple of months ago, and they forecast that only 938,000 homes will be built nationally over the 5-year period of the target.
Right, which leaves a shortfall of what?
262,000, or about 22%.
Okay,
short.
Yeah.
And just this week, a briefing document was released under Freedom of Information, and it was published by the ABC, and it accidentally leaked some information that was meant to be redacted. And instead, and the Australian Treasury, in their incoming government brief after the election, flat out stated that the 1.2 million target quote would not be met, and which is, not rocket science. No one believes it's going to be met. And of course, our slippery treasurer, Jim Chalmers, was questioned by reporters on it, and he basically said, no, we're just behind. It's still achievable. We're going to meet it over the next 4 years, blah, 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 blah. Now, the hilarious thing here, Mike, is that over the past week, the Australian Bureau of Statistics has released separate sets of data on dwelling approvals, dwelling commencements, and dwelling completions. And those are like the three main, sources of construction data that the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, releases. And each of those showed that construction rates are tracking so far below target, it's not funny. And we're not anywhere close to it being met. So in the year to May this year, only 183,000 roughly dwellings were approved for construction. And that's about 57,000 or 24% below the annual housing target. In the year to March, so this is quarterly, so that's monthly data, which is a bit more current, but the latest quarterly data that was released on Wednesday on homes that have started construction and homes that were completed showed that in the year to March this year, 175,500 homes commenced construction. That's 64,500 or 27% below the target, and 179,400 homes were completed, which is 60,500 or 600 roughly, about 25% below the annual target. So the fact of the matter is all these three separate sets of data, approvals, commencements, completions, are all tracking so far below. And, it just shows you that we are so far behind what they think is possible that it's not funny. And the current housing shortage was estimated recently by AMP Chief Economist Shane Oliver to be between 200 and 300,000 homes nationally. So that's the cumulative housing shortage. And the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council, that's that advisory council I mentioned before, in their report, they forecast that Australia's housing shortage is going to increase. So it's going to increase from this current 200 to 300,000 by another 79,000 over the next 5 years as population growth continues to outstrip demand. And New South Wales and Queensland are forecast by the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council to be especially hard hit by housing shortages. Now, here's the rub, Mike. In the back of that National Housing Supply and Affordability Council document, they had sensitivity analysis whereby they looked at different scenarios.
Yeah.
Now, what they showed is that if population growth was merely 15% less than what the Australian Treasury or the Centre for Population forecasts over the next 5 years, then instead of Australia having a 79,000 housing shortage, we'd instead have 40,000 surplus of homes.
Oh, okay.
So what this tells you in black and white, Mike, is that the number one solution, if you want to solve the housing shortage, is we've got to cut demand by reducing immigration. It's there in black and white. If we literally slow the population growth by 15%, doesn't mean we cut the population. It just means it grows by 15% less than the high growth that's projected. Well, instead of having a 79,000 worsening of the housing shortage, it actually improved by 40,000.
So, Leith, it was only yesterday I saw our Prime Minister, on his wonderful Chinese trip, and he said a couple of things that I thought were worth noting. One was that as a leader, essentially you must be ready to adapt to changing conditions, and I thought, well, that cuts him out of the conviction politician class. But more to what we're talking about here right now, he said you have to deal with how the world really is, not how you'd like it to be. So what's happening here, Leith? Are the clever boys and girls behind the scenes, are they not telling poor Albo what the situation really is?
Well, I find it hard to believe, Mike, because their own advisory council has said that you're not going to build enough homes, and that if you merely reduce population growth by 15%, well, instead of not building enough homes, you'll build slightly too many homes.
Right.
Which to me seems pretty, obvious that if the Australian Treasury is telling them that their housing target is unrealistic and will not be met, well then the only solution is you've got to cut demand by cutting population growth. Less inflows of migrants necessarily means that less homes need to be built. It's not rocket, it's pure math. And here's the rub, Mike. Sadly, this week, the Australian Bureau of Statistics also released the latest permanent and long-term arrivals data. So that's monthly data that is basically a leading indicator for net overseas migration.
Yeah.
So it measures people who are coming here, expect that they do their passenger arrival cards and they tick the box saying they expect to be here for more than a year. So it's a proxy for net overseas migration. And what that showed is that we actually it suggested that immigration and population growth has actually accelerated over the first half of this year.
Already, yeah.
And what it showed is that 246,000 net arrivals, net permanent long-term arrivals were recorded over the first 5 months of this year, which was the highest on record. It was higher than last year, but it beat last year's previous record over the first 5 months by about 3,000. And it absolutely smashed. It was about 100,000 higher than the level in 2019 before the pandemic started. So what this suggests is that, whilst the official data says that immigration was slowing towards the end of last year and the population growth was slowing, this data suggests that it's re-accelerated. And all this means is that the housing shortage, the housing supply-demand equation is worsened if this data proves correct, which, if you plot this data against the net overseas migration data, it almost maps at 1-for-1. So if this is spiked, it means net overseas migration is likely spiked.
Weren't there promises made before the election about slowing the rate of immigration? Well, they were only promises, weren't they, Leith?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And look, the official data, unfortunately, the official net overseas migration data is about 6 months behind. So we only received the fourth quarter of last year, late last month.
Okay.
So we're not going to find out what it was in the first half of this year until the end of the year, which is unfortunate. But this data suggests that it has spiked again, but we won't know whether it's true until the end of the year. But given historically, when you map this monthly series against the official quarterly series, it's almost a direct mirror. Like, it's very, very highly correlated. And it suggests that if we've had record of net permanent long-term arrivals in the first 5 months of this year, higher than any other first 5 months of the year period in history, will suggest that immigration's rocketed back up. And all that means is that this housing shortage situation is even worse than what the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council expected, because they based their data on the budgets, the federal budget and the national and the the Centre for Populations figures.
Yeah.
Which is basically what feeds in the budget. And if it's worse, then it means their housing shortage equation is even worse than what they expect.
Well, seems blindingly obvious to me, Leith. But then I remember when I was a kid in primary school, my school teacher, Mrs. Wilson, said, "Michael, the obvious is never nice."
No, it's not. And the thing is, Mike, it is so obvious. It is just basic math.
Yeah.
It's, unfortunately, Australia's housing market is going to remain undersupplied so long as we continue to run immigration at a level that is higher than our ability to build housing and to build infrastructure. And we've done that really for 20 years.
Well,
and the fact of the matter is, unless we change that, the insanity is going to continue to repeat itself.
It would seem inescapable to me. Leith, appreciate your time and insights as always. Thank you for that. There's something else that's coming up that I'd like to talk to you about, but maybe we can do that a few days from now.
Cheers, Mike.
Okay, mate. Leith Van Onselen. Leith is Chief Economist of the MB Fund and MB Super and co-founder of Macro Business.